I was reborn. I returned to the very day I was supposed to register my marriage with Willow. In my previous life, I was the rebound guy everyone talked about. The only reason I managed to marry Willow was that she wanted to find a dependable man and settle down. Yet after we got married, what I got was a reserved, emotionally distant wife and a cold marriage that lasted 10 years. So this time, I deliberately arrived an hour late, and during that 1 hour, I witnessed Willow receive a call from her ex-boyfriend and leave in a panic. She didn't reject the call like she had in my previous life, nor did she choose to wait for me. Standing at the entrance of the Civil Affairs Bureau, I looked at the time on my phone. A knowing smile curled at the corner of my lips. Chapter 1. I opened my eyes while the sky outside was still dim. I stared at the ceiling for a few seconds. There was a water stain up there, one I knew all too well. Back when I was young and renting this place, it was the first thing I saw every morning. Willow had even mentioned it a few times, saying it looked like a cat lying on its stomach. Wait, I suddenly sat upright. This was the apartment I had rented before getting married. I had moved out after the wedding. Later, we moved into our 3-bedroom marital home. The decoration followed her favorite natural wood aesthetic, and the living room displayed a decorative painting she had carried back from Northern Europe herself. There were no water stains on that ceiling. I grabbed the phone from my bedside table and turned on the screen. March 15, 2024, 7:03 a.m. March 15. My fingers froze. The glow of the screen reflected on my face, almost painfully bright. I remembered this date. I remembered it far too clearly. For 10 whole years. Every time this date came around, I would unconsciously glance at the calendar a few extra times, as if it were some habit etched into my muscles that I could never quit. March 15, 2024, the day Willow and I registered our marriage. We had agreed to meet at the entrance of the Civil Affairs Bureau at 9 o'clock. That day, I arrived at 8:40 and stood outside for 20 minutes, watching couples come and go. Some were smiling, some were crying, and some looked completely expressionless, as though they were just handling paperwork. Willow arrived exactly at 9. She was wearing a beige trench coat. Her hair was styled more carefully than usual, and her lipstick was a deeper red than normal. When she saw me, she simply nodded. Let's go in. There was no romance, no sweet affection, not even any unnecessary conversation. We queued, filled out forms, took photos, and recited our vows. The entire process was so polite and formal that it felt like handling official business. While taking the photo, the photographer asked us to stand closer together. Willow shifted half a step toward me. I could smell her perfume. A week before our wedding, she had dragged me to a department store to choose it with her. The sales associate had called it a magnet fragrance. Willow tried it and asked if it smelled good. I said it did, so she bought it. Later, she finished 3 bottles of that perfume. 1 bottle every year. The wedding, buying a house, returning home for the holidays, visiting relatives, having children. Everything happened in orderly sequence, like a carefully designed assembly line. Willow was a good wife. She was filial, graceful, rational, and capable. She kept the household running perfectly and never embarrassed me in front of others. My parents liked her. My friends envied me. Even I couldn't point out anything wrong with her. And yet, there was always something standing between us. Thin, transparent, like a layer of plastic wrap covering our marriage. It preserved it, but it also prevented it from breathing. We slept in the same bed, back to back, on weekends. Each of us stared at our own phones. Our conversations revolved around our child, bills, and our parents' medical checkup reports. When she went on business trips, I actually felt relieved. 10 years, 1,000 good nights. Not once did either of us ever say, "I love you." I put down my phone and got out of bed. My bare feet touched the floorboards. The March morning air was chilly. I walked to the window and pulled open the curtains. The street outside looked both familiar and strange. The breakfast stall downstairs had already opened. Several people were standing beside steaming bamboo baskets. The woman selling pancakes was cracking eggs onto a griddle. I had lived here before. I moved away in 2019. Later, this building was demolished. Just last year, I passed by this area and saw nothing but construction barriers and towering cranes. So, had I really come back? Chapter 2. I stood there, watching the sunlight slowly spread across the city, painting the walls of the building opposite in a pale golden glow. I tried to remember how I had come back, but my mind was nothing but a blur of chaos. What had I done last night? It felt like I had drunk a lot. It felt like, forget it, it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that it was now 7:05 a.m. on March 15, 2024. Less than 2 hours remained before the 9 o'clock meeting Willow and I had arranged. I could go, or I could choose not to. I stood there thinking for a long time. Long enough for the soles of my feet to grow cold. Long enough for 2 waves of customers to rotate through the pancake stall downstairs. Then I turned around and went into the bathroom to wash up. While shaving, I looked at the men in the mirror. A face 10 years younger. No dark circles. No traces of weariness. My hair was still black. I thought about the face I would have 10 years later, tired, numb, occasionally staring into the mirror and wondering if this was all life was ever going to be. After shaving, I changed clothes. I didn't wear the plaid shirt Willow had bought for me. Instead, I picked a black one from the very back of the closet. The tag was still attached. I had bought it when I was around 30, thinking I'd wear it someday. Then I never thought about it again. Before leaving, I checked the time. 8:15 a.m. The Civil Affairs Bureau wasn't far from my rented apartment. A 15-minute walk. If I left now, I'd arrive at 8:30, 10 minutes earlier than I had in my previous life. I stood in the entryway with my hand on the doorknob, but I didn't move. Someone was climbing the stairs outside. The footsteps grew closer, past my door, then gradually faded away. The smell of fried dough sticks and soy milk drifted up from the breakfast shop downstairs. I caught the scent. My stomach stirred slightly. 8:16 a.m. I decided to wait. I didn't know what I was waiting for. I just wanted to wait. I turned back into the apartment and sat down on the couch. It was an old fabric sofa provided by the landlord. The cushions had long since collapsed. The moment I sat down, my body sank into it. Leaning back, I stared at the clock hanging on the wall. It had a cheap plastic frame. The second hand ticked forward one jump at a time. It wasn't very accurate. Every month it lost 2 or 3 minutes. In my previous life, I had thought countless times about replacing that clock, but I never did. I always told myself I would be moving out soon anyway. Later, I really did move out. The clock stayed behind with the landlord. I had no idea whether it was still there now. 8:20 a.m. I took out my phone and swiped through the screen. There were no messages from Willow. No missed calls. We had spoken once on the phone the night before. She had confirmed the time and location in a businesslike tone. 9 o'clock. At the entrance of the Civil Affairs Bureau. Don't forget your ID card and household registration booklet. I gave a brief acknowledgement. Then she hung up. That night, I suffered from insomnia. I tossed and turned for a long time before finally falling asleep. At the time, I thought it was just pre-wedding anxiety. Only later did I realize that perhaps something inside me had been trying to warn me. 8:25 a.m. I stood up and walked to the window. The streets were becoming more crowded. Students in school uniforms, office workers carrying briefcases, elderly people returning from the market with groceries. A young mother pushed a stroller past the building. The child inside waved both hands and babbled excitedly about something. I thought of our daughter. Her nickname was Emma. When Emma was 3 years old, Willow took her to early education classes twice a week without fail, rain or shine. Sometimes I got off work early and went to pick her up. I would stand outside the classroom and watch her play games with the teacher. Her eyes curved into crescents whenever she smiled. Emma looked just like Willow. Her eyes, her nose, her mouth, even the way she frowned. But unlike Willow, she loved to smile. Whenever she grinned, 2 tiny canine teeth peeked out. The sight could melt anyone's heart. I loved Emma. Willow loved Emma too. Because of her, we shared countless interactions and conversations. Yet that transparent wall between us never disappeared. Sometimes after reading Emma a bedtime story, I would leave her room and see Willow leaning against the headboard, scrolling through her phone. The glow of the screen illuminated her face. Her expression was as still and lifeless as stagnant water. I would lie down on the other side of the bed with my back facing hers. Half a meter separated us, like a river running between 2 shores. I had thought about asking her many times, "Why did you marry me in the first place?" But I never said the words. I was afraid the answer would be something I didn't want to hear. And I was equally afraid the answer would simply be, "Because you were suitable." What's more painful than a loveless marriage is realizing you were chosen as the safest backup option. 8:30 a.m. My phone rang. I lowered my gaze. It was Willow. Chapter 3. My heart skipped a beat. I stared at Willow's name on the screen, my finger hovering above the answer button. 2 seconds passed. I didn't press it. The ringtone continued. The vibration made the phone tremble lightly in my palm. In my previous life, every time Willow called, I answered immediately. Okay, got it. That was usually how it went. We rarely spent long periods talking on the phone. The longest call we ever had was when we were discussing which kindergarten Emma should attend. It lasted 13 minutes. After that call ended, I sat there holding my phone in a daze. Then I realized that during those entire 13 minutes, we had discussed nothing but practical matters. Not a single unnecessary word. The ringtone stopped. The screen displayed, "Missed call, Willow." I stood there with the phone in my hand, listening to my heartbeat. Thump, thump, thump. Each beat was clear. I didn't call back. 8:35 a.m. I walked to the entryway, changed my shoes, and stepped outside. The stairwell was dim. My footsteps echoed hollowly as I descended. On the second floor, I passed an elderly woman carrying groceries upstairs. I moved aside to let her through. She nodded at me and muttered something under her breath. I didn't catch it. As soon as I exited the building, sunlight poured down directly onto me. The brightness made me squint. I headed toward the Civil Affairs Bureau, but I walked slowly. When I passed the breakfast stall, I stopped. 1 bowl of soy milk, 2 fried dough sticks. I sat down at a small table by the entrance. The soy milk was hot. I blew on it before taking a sip. On the day of our wedding registration in my previous life, I hadn't eaten anything at all. As a result, while taking photos, the photographer kept saying, "Smile, groom, give us a smile." I couldn't. The expression in the final photo looked worse than crying. Later, Willow placed that photo album in storage. It stayed buried away and was never taken out again. Once, Emma found it. Pointing at the picture, she asked, "Daddy, why do you look unhappy?" I froze for a moment before replying. Daddy wasn't unhappy. He was just a little nervous. 8:40 a.m. I finished the last sip of soy milk, paid the bill, and continued walking. Past the street, around one corner, then another 200 meters. That was the Civil Affairs Bureau. I had walked this route countless times in my previous life. I could probably do it with my eyes closed. Yet now, every step felt strangely unreal. As I approached the entrance, I stopped. Standing behind a plane tree, I observed the area. From this angle, I could clearly see both the building and the open space in front of it. Several people were already waiting there. A young couple was helping each other adjust their collars. The girl wore a shy smile. A man in a suit stood nearby, staring down at his phone, probably waiting for someone, but there was no sign of Willow. I leaned against the tree trunk and checked my phone. 8:50 a.m. Compared to my previous life, I was 10 minutes later. Compared to our agreed meeting time, I was still 10 minutes early. Willow probably hadn't arrived yet. Just as that thought crossed my mind, a taxi pulled up in front of the Civil Affairs Bureau. The rear door opened. The first thing that appeared was a foot in a beige high heel. Then the rest of her emerged. A beige trench coat, long hair draped over her shoulders, a document folder in her hand. Willow. From dozens of meters away, I watched her, and a strange feeling rose inside me. She looked younger than she did in my memories, even younger than the version of myself I saw in the mirror every day after returning 10 years into the past. 25-year-old Willow. The faint weariness that would later settle into her features had not yet appeared. She stood with perfect posture, chin slightly raised, like a proud white swan. She lowered her head and checked her watch. Then she looked around, probably searching for me. I watched her take out her phone, glance at the screen, and put it away again. 9 a.m. Her gaze swept through the crowd. She didn't find me. A slight frown appeared between her brows. She took out her phone again. This time, she lowered her head and started typing. A few seconds later, my phone vibrated. I looked down. A message from Willow. "I'm here. Where are you?" I stared at the words. My finger hovered over the screen. Still, I didn't move. 9:01 a.m. Willow stood at the entrance with her phone clenched in her hand. She looked around once more. Her brows drew together even tighter. Her lips pressed into a thin line. I knew that expression. She was unhappy. When Willow was unhappy, she never lost her temper. She never complained. She simply pressed her lips together and swallowed all those emotions by herself. In my previous life, I had seen that expression far too many times. Chapter 4. 9:03 a.m. Willow lowered her head to look at her phone. This time, she wasn't typing. She was staring at the screen, as if she were hesitating about something. From behind the tree, dozens of meters away, I watched her. Then I saw her expression change. It was a strange change. One eyebrow lifted slightly. Her eyes widened just a little. Her lips parted. The expression lasted only 2 seconds. Then she lowered her head again and stared at the phone, her fingers flying rapidly across the screen. After typing for a while, she stopped. She seemed to be waiting for a reply. A few seconds later, her phone vibrated again. She looked down. This time, her expression changed completely. Her brows knitted together. Her lips pressed into a tighter line, but not because she was annoyed. It was anxiety. A kind of anxiety I had never seen on her face before. The hand holding her phone trembled slightly. Her other hand tightened around the document folder. She lifted her head and looked around. This time, her gaze swept across the direction where I was standing. Instinctively, I stepped back, but her eyes didn't linger. They passed right over me. Then I saw Willow do something I had never witnessed before. She raised the phone to her ear and made a call. The call connected quickly. She spoke a few words into the phone. Her voice was low, too low for me to hear, but I could see her expression clearly. Urgent, flustered. In 10 years of marriage, I had never seen that look on her face. After hanging up, she stood there motionless, staring down at the document folder in her hands. For more than 10 seconds, she remained frozen in place, like a statue. Then she raised her head and scanned her surroundings again. This time her gaze moved more slowly, as though she were searching carefully for something. I pressed myself completely behind the tree trunk, exposing only one eye to peek out. She didn't find me. Willow looked at her phone again, probably checking the time. 9:07 a.m. Then she made a decision. She turned around, walked to the roadside, and raised a hand to hail a taxi. The door opened. She got in. The car pulled away and merged into traffic, farther and farther, until it disappeared at the end of the street. I stepped out from behind the tree and stood there, watching the direction in which the taxi had vanished. 9:08 a.m. The wind brushed past my ears, carrying the chill of March. The sunlight falling on my body was warm. Across the street, a music store was playing an old song. Sunny day. The piano intro drifted through the air in broken fragments. I lowered my head and checked my phone. No new messages. No missed calls. Willow hadn't told me she was leaving. She hadn't explained why. She had simply vanished, like a stone dropped into water. It created a ring of ripples. Then the surface became calm again, as though nothing had ever happened. I slipped the phone into my pocket and took a deep breath. The air carried the scent of plain tree leaves, the smell of car exhaust, the aroma of fried dough drifting from the breakfast stall nearby. All those scents mixed together and rushed into my lungs, leaving me in a daze. I thought back to this day in my previous life. At exactly 9 o'clock, Willow had appeared on time. We went inside together. We queued, filled out forms, took photographs, recited our vows. I remembered standing beside her during the photo session. Her shoulder lightly brushed against my arm. Even through our clothes, I could feel a trace of warmth. During the vows, her voice wasn't loud, but she pronounced every word clearly. We voluntarily enter into marriage and, from this day forward, will share the responsibilities and obligations entrusted to us by this union. When she finished, she turned and glanced at me. A faint smile touched the corner of her lips. I remembered that smile for a very long time. I thought it was the beginning of something good. Only later did I realize it wasn't a beginning. It was merely part of the process. I stood there for a long time, until my phone vibrated again. I looked down. A message from Willow. George, something urgent came up, so I had to leave. I probably won't make it today. Let's reschedule for another day. Sent at 9:13 a.m. I stared at those lines, read them word by word, then read them again. Finally, I typed a reply. Okay, another day. Send. After sending it, I slipped the phone back into my pocket and turned around to walk away. Chapter 5. Willow sat in the taxi, her fingers gripping her phone so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. The city scenery outside rushed past in a blur. She couldn't focus on any of it. Her mind was filled with the contents of that phone call. Willow, Makoto's been in an accident. The caller was Makoto's secretary. Her voice was trembling with tears. He fell from a construction scaffold. There's so much blood. We've called an ambulance and they're taking him to the hospital right now. He said not to contact his family. He told me to call you. Makoto. Willow closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She hadn't heard that name in a very long time. They had broken up 3 years ago. Makoto had moved to another city while she stayed here. On the day they separated, he said many cruel things, and so did she. In the end, Makoto had said, Willow, you're going to regret this. Biting her lip, she replied. Regret what? Regret being with you. Then she slammed the door and walked away. Her high heels clicked sharply against the floor. By the time she left the building, her eyes were burning with unshed tears, but she refused to let them fall. After that, they never contacted each other again. She blocked every way he could reach her, and he quietly respected that boundary. Occasionally, mutual friends would mention him. He'd started working on construction sites. He'd become a project manager. Apparently, he was doing quite well. Whenever she heard those updates, she would simply nod, say nothing. The news would stir a faint ripple inside her heart. Then it would disappear. She thought they would never cross paths again. Not in this lifetime. Until today. Until she was standing outside the Civil Affairs Bureau, waiting to register her marriage with George. Then her phone suddenly received a text message from an unfamiliar number. Willow, this is Maria, Makoto's secretary. Makoto has been seriously injured and is being treated in the emergency room. He keeps calling your name. Can you come? Central Hospital Emergency Department. She stared at the message. Her mind went blank for several seconds. Then she dialed the number. As soon as the call connected, Maria's voice came through, frantic and disordered. Willow, Makoto fell from a scaffold. It's really serious. He's unconscious now. During the ambulance ride he kept saying your name. I had no choice but to contact you. Standing there with her phone in hand, Willow felt as if everything around her had drifted far away. The people lining up, the people waiting, the people smiling, the people crying. All of them became a blurry background. The only thing she could hear was her own heartbeat. Thump, thump, thump. The pounding echoed in her temples until they hurt. Then she looked up and searched the crowd. George wasn't there. She checked the time. 9:03 a.m. George was 3 minutes late. Willow knew she should have been angry. George was not the kind of person who was careless about time. Whenever they made plans, he was always punctual. Yet today, of all days, he was late. But she couldn't spare any energy for anger. She looked at the message again, bit her lip, then walked to the roadside and hailed a taxi. The moment she got into the car, she sent George a message. "I'm here. Where are you?" After sending it, she clutched the phone and waited for his reply. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, nothing. She stared at the screen. The display went dark. She lit it up again. It went dark once more. Again she woke it. The only thing in the chat window was her lone message. Beneath it was empty space. She suddenly remembered that while searching for him earlier, she thought she had seen someone standing behind a tree in the distance. A man wearing black. His build looked somewhat like George's, but she hadn't seen clearly. The taxi turned a corner. A different stretch of city appeared outside the window. As she watched the buildings flash by, George's face suddenly came to mind. They had met through a matchmaking introduction. The person who introduced them was a friend of her mother's. Their first meeting was at a cafe. When she arrived, he was already there. He sat by the window with a cup of Americano in front of him and what looked like a book in his hands. Only when she approached did she realize it wasn't a book at all. It was a document. He was reading it so intently that he hadn't noticed her walking over. Standing in front of him, she said, "George." He looked up, momentarily stunned. Then he quickly stood up and hurriedly gathered the papers. "Sorry, I got a little bored while waiting, so I was just reading something." Willow smiled. "It's okay." Chapter 6. That day, they talked for more than an hour. He wasn't a man of many words, but everything he said felt sincere. He told her he worked at an architectural design institute. He said he didn't have many hobbies, mostly reading, and occasionally playing sports. When he asked what she liked, she said she enjoyed watching movies. George asked if there had been any good movies lately. She replied that there hadn't been. George smiled. "Then when a good one comes out, I'll take you to see it." At the time, Willow thought he was actually pretty interesting. Later, they really did go to the movies together. It was an art house film about a man and a woman who missed each other, only to reunite years later. When the movie ended, Willow was crying so hard that tears streamed down her face. George sat beside her, awkwardly handing over tissues, completely unsure what to say. She asked him, "Why aren't you crying?" He replied, "I don't really know how to cry." She burst out laughing. It was the first time she had laughed out loud in front of him. The taxi came to a stop, pulling her back to reality. "We're here," the driver said. Willow paid the fare and stepped out. Standing before Central Hospital, she looked up at the bright red emergency department sign. People were constantly moving in and out. Some pushed wheelchairs, some wheeled stretchers, others hurried around with anxious expressions. Clutching the document folder tightly, she took a deep breath and walked inside. The emergency department was packed. The sharp smell of disinfectant filled the air. She found the nurse's station and asked where Makoto was. After checking the computer, a nurse informed her that he was in the resuscitation room and that she would have to wait outside. When she arrived, she saw Maria sitting on a bench with her head buried in her hands. Her shoulders shook as she cried, "Maria." Maria looked up. Her eyes were red and swollen. Seeing Willow, she froze briefly before standing. "Willow, you came. How is he?" "He's still being treated." Maria's voice cracked. "The doctor said he hit his head. The situation isn't good." As she spoke, she nearly broke down again. "It's all my fault. I should have been watching him. He said he wanted to inspect the construction site today. I told him I could send someone else, but he insisted on going himself." Willow sat beside her and placed the document folder on her lap. The doors to the resuscitation room remained shut. The red warning light above them stayed illuminated. Every so often, a nurse would push through the doors and disappear inside again. Whenever the doors opened, sounds spilled out, the steady beeping of machines, doctors and nurses shouting instructions, the noise of frantic activity, someone calling out. Willow sat there staring at the doors, thinking about nothing, and somehow thinking about everything. She remembered the last time Makoto had called her. It was 6 months after their breakup. That night, she had worked overtime until very late. When she left the office, she discovered it was raining. Without an umbrella, she stood beneath the building entrance waiting for the rain to stop. Then her phone rang. An unfamiliar number. She answered. Makoto's voice came from the other side. "Willow, how have you been?" She froze with the phone in her hand for several seconds. Makoto continued. "I just wanted to hear your voice," she replied. "Makoto, we've already broken up." "I know." A pause. Then he sighed. "Forget it. Get home early. It's raining. Don't get soaked." And then he hung up. Willow stood outside the office listening to the disconnected tone. Rain poured down around her. Droplets splashed onto her shoes. Cold against her skin, she remained there for a very long time. Long enough for the rain to stop. long enough for her phone screen to go dark, light up, then go dark again. That night she couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned endlessly. Memories surfaced one after another. The good moments, the bad moments, the happy times, the painful times. She remembered the cruel words he had said on the day they broke up. She also remembered the letter he had written when they first started dating. In that letter, he had written, "I'll treat you well for the rest of my life." Later, she threw that letter away, and eventually, she forgot him completely, until today. The doors of the resuscitation room opened. A doctor in surgical scrubs walked out, removing his mask. He spoke with obvious exhaustion. "Who is Makoto's family?" Willow immediately stood up, then hesitated. "I'm his friend." The doctor glanced at her. "We managed to save him, but he has intracranial bleeding. He needs surgery immediately. The operation is very risky. We need a family member to sign the consent form." Beside her, Maria nearly jumped in panic. "His family is all out of town. It'll take them several hours to get here." The doctor frowned. "Then who's going to sign?" Willow stood there, looking at the doctor, then at the half-open door of the resuscitation room. Through the gap, she could see part of a hospital bed, a white blanket, one exposed hand, and 4 needles taped to the back of it, fluid dripping steadily. She recognized that hand. Long fingers, distinct knuckles. Those hands had once held hers. "Can I sign?" she heard herself ask. The doctor looked at her. "What are you to him?" She fell silent for 2 seconds. Then she answered quietly. "His ex-girlfriend." Chapter 7. I didn't go home. On my way back from the Civil Affairs Bureau, I passed the breakfast stall again. The owner was clearing away bowls and chopsticks. When she saw me, she looked surprised. "Young man, you're back. Forget something." "No," I said. "Another bowl of soy milk." I sat in the same seat as before, holding the bowl and drinking slowly. The soy milk was still hot. This time I didn't bother blowing on it. I took a direct sip. The heat numbed my tongue. I didn't spit it out. I swallowed it. My phone lay on the table, screen facing upward. After finishing the soy milk, I checked the time. 9:45 a.m. 45 minutes had passed since the time I was supposed to register my marriage. I thought back to this same period in my previous life. From 9 to 10 o'clock, what would we have been doing? Standing in line. We waited for about 20 minutes. Then we filled out the forms. I finished mine quickly. Willow finished hers even faster. Afterward, we sat on a bench waiting for our number to be called. Neither of us spoke. We simply sat there. At the time, I wanted to start a conversation, but I couldn't think of anything to say. Ask if she was nervous. I wasn't nervous myself, so that would have sounded fake. Ask if she was hungry. It was barely after 9 in the morning. That seemed too early. In the end, I said nothing. We just sat there. When our number was called, she stood up. I stood up with her. Together we walked to the counter and handed over our documents. The staff checked our information and directed us to take photos. While taking the pictures, the photographer kept saying, "Closer, a little closer." So we moved closer, shoulder to shoulder. Then came the vows, the certificate, and finally, we walked out of the Civil Affairs Bureau. She glanced at her phone and said, "I need to go back to work." I asked, "Want me to take you?" "No, it's not on your way." Then she left. I stood outside the Civil Affairs Bureau and watched her walk away. Her back was straight. Her pace was steady. Soon she disappeared into the crowd. I looked down at the red marriage certificate in my hand. Opening it, I saw the photo. The two of us wore the same official-looking smiles. I closed it, put it away, and went back to work. That evening, we had dinner together at a restaurant near my office. It was our way of celebrating. She ordered noodles. I ordered rice. As we ate, we talked, but every topic revolved around work. After the meal, I paid the bill. She said, "I'll get it," I replied. "No need." She didn't insist. By the time we left the restaurant, the sky was dark. I walked her to the subway station. Standing by the turnstiles, she said, "Get some sleep early tonight. You too." Then she tapped her card and went inside. I turned around and left. That was the first day of our marriage. I finished the last sip of soy milk and set the bowl down. The owner came over to collect it. Casually, she asked, "Young man, something happened today, didn't it? You don't look quite right." I froze briefly, then smiled. "It's nothing." She took the bowl and walked away. I remained seated there, watching people come and go along the street. 10 a.m. My phone vibrated. A message from Willow. "Sorry, I really couldn't make it today. Let's do it another day." Another day. I stared at those words. The corner of my mouth twitched. In my previous life, there had been no another day. It happened on that day, at that exact time, not a minute early or late. If I had really arrived at 9 o'clock today, we would have gone inside. We would have gotten married. We would have lived through those 10 years. Then I would have gotten drunk and woken up here. But this time, I didn't. I was 1 hour late, and in that single hour, I saw a different Willow. A Willow who could panic. A Willow who could become desperate. A Willow who would drop everything and leave without hesitation for someone else. A Willow whose brows tightened. Whose lips pressed together. Whose fingers trembled around her phone. I had known her for 10 years. I had never seen her like that. I always thought she was simply that kind of person. Calm, distant, composed no matter what happened. I never knew she could panic. Never knew she could lose control. Never knew she could abandon everything after receiving a single phone call. Who had made that call? I didn't know, but I knew one thing. That person was definitely not me. I stood up and headed home. When I reached the building downstairs, I saw a familiar figure. Willow. Chapter 8. She was standing outside the building I rented, looking down at her phone. She didn't notice me approaching. She was still wearing that beige trench coat, but her hair was a little messy now, and exhaustion from running around all morning showed on her face. Why was she here? My footsteps paused for a moment, then I continued walking forward. The sound of my steps caught her attention. She looked up, saw me, and froze. George, I asked. Why are you here? She stood there clutching the document folder. Her lips moved slightly, but no words came out. I stopped 3 steps away from her. We stood facing each other. Between us stretched the March sunlight and the breeze. Today, she began. Her voice strained. Makoto had an accident. Makoto. When I heard that name, memory surfaced. In my previous life, I had heard it once before, not long after our marriage. One day she answered a phone call and her expression seemed unusual. I casually asked who it was. She replied, an old friend. Later, I happened to see the name on her phone. Makoto. The chat history was empty. I never asked about it. What happened to him? I asked. He fell from a construction scaffold. He was being treated in the hospital. She paused. I went to the hospital earlier. I nodded. Is he okay? They managed to save him, but he needs surgery. He's still not out of danger. She lowered her eyes. His family hasn't arrived yet. So, I stayed there for a while. I nodded again. Silence fell between us. The sunlight illuminated tiny specks of dust drifting through the air. Somewhere upstairs, a window opened. The sound of someone beating out a blanket echoed rhythmically through the courtyard. Then she asked, why didn't you go to the Civil Affairs Bureau? I looked at her. I did. She froze. I didn't see you. I saw you. My voice was calm. I was standing behind the plane tree across the street. I stayed there for a while. She looked at me. Her expression complicated. Then why didn't you come over? I didn't answer immediately. I thought about my previous life, about those 10 years, about the thin, transparent wall that had always existed between us, about countless nights spent sleeping back to back, about the lifeless expression she wore so often, about the moment when Emma asked, Daddy, why are you unhappy? And how I couldn't answer. Finally, I said, I wanted to see what you would do if I didn't show up. Willow's gaze froze. The wind lifted her hair. Several strands drifted across her face. She didn't brush them away. She simply looked at me. You saw it? Yes. And then, looking at her, I suddenly felt there were things I could finally say. Willow. I spoke her name calmly. How long have we known each other? She seemed surprised by the question. About 3 months. 3 months. We met through matchmaking. Saw each other 5 or 6 times. Had dinner together. Watched one movie. Then decided to get married. In my previous life, that had seemed perfectly normal. After all, we were both at the age where marriage was expected. The conditions matched. Our personalities seemed compatible. Our families approved. So why not? But now I didn't think that way anymore. 3 months, I said. Do you think you really know me? She didn't answer. I don't know you either. I paused. I remember you telling me that you're slow to warm up to people, that you're reserved, that you're not good at expressing yourself. But when I saw you answering that phone call today, when I saw how panicked you were, that was when I realized you have another side to you. Willow's eyelashes trembled. I continued. I know why you're marrying me. You're at the age where your family is pressuring you. You think I'm a decent option. You don't dislike me. I'm the same. She didn't deny it. I continued. But when I stood there watching you today, I found myself wondering something. If one day something happened to me, would you come running for me the way you ran for him? Willow parted her lips. She seemed about to say something, but no words came. You don't need to answer. I shook my head gently. I don't want to know the answer either. Chapter 9. The sunlight stretched a long shadow between us. The sound of blankets being beaten upstairs stopped. A window closed. Then everything became quiet. I asked. Makoto is your ex-boyfriend? Yes. After a brief pause, I asked. When you rushed over there earlier, what were you thinking? Willow was silent for a long time. Then she said, nothing. I raised an eyebrow. Nothing. She nodded. It was just, when I heard he was hurt, I wanted to go see him. She lowered her gaze. I didn't think about anything else. I didn't think about whether I should go. I didn't think about whether you'd be waiting for me. I didn't think about anything. I nodded. I understood that answer. So what are you thinking now? I asked. She looked up at me. There was a trace of confusion in her eyes. I don't know, she said. Willow stood in front of me. After saying those words, both of us fell silent. The truth was, she could have explained a lot. She could have explained that she hadn't spoken to Makoto in 3 years, that their breakup had been ugly, that some of the things she said were even harsher than the things he said, that she had gone to the hospital today simply because she heard he was injured and wanted to make sure he survived. Nothing more. But she didn't explain, because she saw something strange in my eyes. Not anger, not disappointment, not accusation. Instead, there was a calmness, a look that seemed to be waiting for something. She couldn't understand it. Just then, her phone rang. She looked down. It was Maria. Willow, Maria said urgently. Makoto's gone into surgery. The doctor said it'll take at least 3 or 4 hours. Are you still coming? Willow gripped the phone and glanced at me. I said, if you want to go, then go. She paused, then said into the phone, I'll be there soon. After hanging up, she looked at me. She seemed to want to ask something, but she didn't know how. You should go, I said. I don't have anything going on. What about you? I'll head back first. If anything comes up, call me. After saying that, I turned around and walked into the building. Willow remained standing at the entrance, watching George's retreating figure climb the stairs. His pace was steady, neither fast nor slow. Every step felt firm. When he reached the landing, he paused briefly, but he didn't look back. He simply continued upward. Only after his figure completely disappeared into the stairwell did she turn around and head back toward the hospital. When she arrived, Maria was still sitting outside the operating room. The moment she saw Willow, she stood up. Her eyes were red again. Willow, isn't it over yet? Willow asked. Maria shook her head. No. The doctor said it's a very complicated surgery. It'll take time. Willow sat down beside her and placed the document folder on her lap. Maria glanced at the folder and looked surprised. Willow, did you have something important today? Willow lowered her eyes to the folder. Inside were her household registration booklet, identification card, photographs, and all the photocopied documents she had prepared the day before. When gathering those materials, she had checked every item repeatedly, making sure nothing was missing, the same way she approached any important task. Now all those documents sat quietly on her lap, unused. Not a single one had served its purpose. Willow shook her head. Nothing important. Maria didn't ask again. The two women sat on the bench together, staring at the tightly closed operating room doors. Time passed slowly. Occasionally, a nurse would come out. Each time, they would immediately look up, but the nurses merely hurried past. None of them were looking for the two of them. Willow lowered her head and looked at her phone. The screen lit up, then went dark, then lit up again. George hadn't sent a single message. She opened their chat window. The last message was still the one she had sent. Let's do it another day. She typed a few words, then deleted them. Typed again, deleted them again. In the end, she sent nothing at all. Chapter 10. A little after 3 in the afternoon, the doors to the operating room finally opened. A doctor stepped out and removed his mask. Relief softened the exhaustion on his face. The surgery was successful. The patient is no longer in immediate danger, but he'll need to remain under observation. Whether there are any lasting complications depends on how he is after he wakes up. Willow stood up. The weight hanging over her heart finally eased, at least halfway. Thank you, doctor. The doctor nodded and left. Beside her, Maria clasped her hands together, muttering something under her breath, probably a prayer of gratitude. A while later, Makoto was wheeled out. His face was wrapped in bandages. Various tubes were connected to his body. His complexion was frighteningly pale. As Willow looked at him, he felt both familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. She followed the medical staff into the ICU area. After settling him in, the nurses explained several precautions and then asked them to leave. The patient needed rest. Family and visitors could wait outside. Willow stood outside the ICU, looking at him through the glass. His brows were furrowed. Even unconscious, they remained furrowed. She remembered something he once said. He used to sleep with his brows knitted together. His mother claimed it was because he carried too many worries. Makoto always denied it, and now she saw that familiar frown again. Willow, Maria said quietly beside her. Makoto, he never forgot you. Willow said nothing. Maria continued. He's mentioned you so many times. He said the biggest regret of his life was breaking up with you. There are still old photos of you saved on his phone. I've seen them myself. Miss Maria. Willow interrupted her. Please stop. Maria immediately fell silent. She stood nearby, secretly watching Willow. Willow remained where she was, looking at the men behind the glass. Yet the person on her mind was George. She remembered him standing in front of her, remembered the calm look in his eyes when he said, I don't want to know the answer either. She remembered his back as he turned and walked into the stairwell, remembered how he paused briefly at the landing, but never looked back. Suddenly, she felt tired, not physically tired. It was the feeling of something inside her sinking, falling endlessly, never reaching the bottom. Her phone rang. She lowered her gaze. A message from George. How did everything turn out? She stared at those words. For 2 seconds. She simply looked. Then she typed. The surgery was successful. He's still being monitored in the ICU. After sending it, she waited for a reply. She waited a long time. Eventually, only one word appeared. Good. I sent that single word and set my phone aside. Lying on the couch in my rented apartment, I stared at the water stain on the ceiling. My thoughts were a complete mess. Ever since returning from the Civil Affairs Bureau, one question had been circling endlessly in my mind. What would have happened if I had arrived on time today? I knew the answer all too well. We would have registered our marriage. We would have gotten married. We would have lived through those 10 years. She would have been a good wife. I would have been a good husband. We would have had an adorable daughter. We would have started paying a mortgage, enrolled our child in early education classes, gone home during the holidays to deal with relatives. We would have maintained a respectable marriage in front of everyone else, and spent 10 years sleeping back to back in the same bed. We would have grown older, more tired, more silent, until one day, one of us finally asked, "What exactly are we doing?" I didn't know whether that person would have been me. I didn't know whether it would have been her. But now things were different. Today I hadn't arrived on time, and she hadn't waited for me. She ran to the hospital because of a single phone call. I stood behind a tree and watched it all happen. We hadn't registered our marriage yet. The thin, transparent wall between us hadn't been completely built. I still had a choice. I could continue. I could arrange another date. I could follow the original script all the way to the end. I could pretend those 10 years of memories never existed. Pretend I knew nothing. Live the kind of life whose ending could be seen at a glance. Or I could stop. I could tell her, "We aren't right for each other. Let's just leave it here." She would probably be surprised for a moment, then nod and say okay. She would return to her own life. She would continue waiting for that phone call. She would what? I didn't know. I only knew one thing. In my previous life, she waited 10 years and never truly received that call. Or perhaps she did, but I wasn't the one making it. I remembered the expression on her face that day at the hospital, the way she stood outside the operating room, looking through the glass at the person inside. It was an expression I had never seen before, and at that moment, I finally understood something. So she was capable of looking at someone that way. It was just that the person was never me. Chapter 11. My phone vibrated again. I picked it up. A message from Willow. Makoto woke up. I stared at the words. I typed a few sentences, deleted them. In the end, I replied with only one word. A while later, another message arrived. His family is here. I'm leaving now. I looked at the message and didn't know how to respond. I knew where she was, standing outside the hospital, maybe raising her hand to hail a taxi. I knew she was still wearing that beige trench coat. I knew her hair was probably a little messy. I knew exhaustion was written all over her face. I knew she was still carrying that document folder. Inside were all the papers that should have been used today, but I didn't know what she was thinking. I didn't know where she wanted to go. Home? Or here? I didn't ask. A few moments later, another message appeared. Where are you? I stared at those words. After hesitating for several seconds, I typed, "At home." After sending it, I sat up and looked toward the door. I was waiting for her to come, and I was also waiting for an answer. Willow stood outside the hospital, looking at the message on her screen. At home. She lifted her head and looked at the street. The sky had already darkened. The streetlights weren't on yet. Headlights streamed endlessly through the road, forming rivers of moving light. A cool breeze blew past. She tightened her trench coat around herself. She should go home, take a shower, change into clean clothes, get some proper sleep. Too many things had happened today. She needed time to process them, but she didn't walk toward the subway station. Instead, she stood at the roadside and hailed a taxi. Then she gave the driver the address of my apartment complex. The car pulled away. Buildings rushed backward outside the window. Leaning against the seat, she closed her eyes. Her thoughts were a tangled mess. When Makoto woke up, she had been standing beside his bed. His eyes slowly opened. His gaze wandered through the hospital room before settling on her face. He stared at her for several seconds. Then his lips moved. His voice came out hoarse. "Willow." She nodded. His eyes suddenly turned red. At that moment, something inside her trembled violently. Not because she was moved, but because, for a split second, she remembered things from many years ago, back when they had first started dating. Once, she had been hospitalized with an illness. Makoto had taken leave from work and stayed with her. For 3 entire days, he never left. One night she woke up and found him asleep beside her bed. His brows were furrowed. His mouth hung slightly open, like a child. Back then, she had thought, this is the person I'll spend my life with. Yet they still broke up. His family opposed the relationship. Caught between both sides, he struggled. In the end, he chose his family. On the day they separated, he stood in front of her with his head lowered, filled with guilt. Willow, I'm sorry, she answered. Does saying sorry change anything? Then she slammed the door and walked away. After that, she never cried again, until today. Lying in the hospital bed, his eyes red, he looked at her and asked, "Why did you come?" "Your secretary called me." He nodded, closed his eyes. After a long silence, he said one more thing. "Thank you." Just those 2 words, thanking her for making the trip. Willow stood there, unsure what to say. Soon afterward, a nurse entered and informed them that family members could come in to visit. Willow stepped outside. Then she saw his parents hurrying down the corridor. Their movements were frantic. The expressions on their faces were difficult to read. Standing by the doorway, she watched them enter. She heard his mother crying, heard his father speaking softly beside her. Then Willow turned around and left. Outside the hospital, she sent George that message, and now she was sitting in a taxi, heading toward him. She didn't know what she wanted to do. Maybe she simply wanted to see him. The taxi came to a stop. She paid the fare, got out, and entered the aging apartment building. The stairwell was dim. One of the motion sensor lights had burned out. The remaining one barely worked. Her footsteps echoed through the empty corridor as she climbed the stairs. When she reached the 3rd floor, she stopped. Standing before the door, there was no apartment number on it, only a faded red paper blessing character left over from the Lunar New Year. Most of it had peeled away, but it still clung stubbornly to the wood. Chapter 12. She took a deep breath and knocked on the door. The door opened. I stood there. When I saw her, I said nothing and stepped aside to let her in. She walked inside. The apartment was small, even smaller than the place she rented. A couch, a bed, a wardrobe, a table. On the table sat a cup of instant noodles. The noodles had gone soggy, and the chopsticks rested beside it. She stood there, looking around. This was where I lived. 3 years later, we would get married and move into the apartment she had helped purchase with the down payment. After that, I never came back here again. "Have a seat," I said. She sat down on the couch and immediately sank into it. The cushions were badly worn out. I stood by the window and looked at her. Neither of us spoke. After a long while, she finally said, "Makoto woke up. His family arrived. So I left. She paused, unsure how to continue. I don't know if what I did today was right. I looked at her but didn't respond. She continued, "I haven't spoken to him in 3 years. Then today I suddenly got that call saying he'd been hurt. And I didn't think about anything. I just ran there." I nodded. Then she asked, "Are you angry?" "No." She froze. "Why aren't you angry?" Looking into her eyes, I answered, "Because I didn't show up on time today either." She fell silent. I continued, "I stood behind that tree and watched you wait for me. I watched you stand there for more than 10 minutes. I watched you answer the phone. I watched your expression change. I watched you run away. And while I was standing there, I kept thinking about something. The person you were waiting for should have been me. But the person you were thinking about when you ran away wasn't me." Something tightened sharply in her chest. "Willow." I spoke her name calmly. "Have you ever loved me?" She opened her mouth. She wanted to say yes, but the word caught in her throat. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't force it out. "You don't have to answer." I shook my head. I spent the entire afternoon thinking, and I finally understood something. She looked at me, waiting. We really could get married. Our circumstances fit. Our personalities fit. Our families approve. We could have a child. Spend a lifetime together. There's nothing wrong with that. A lot of people live that way. I paused before continuing. "But Willow, the way you look today, I've never seen that side of you before. It's not because you were panicking. It's because the person who made you panic wasn't me." As she listened, her eyes slowly turned red. "I don't really know what love is," I said, "but I think I know what settling looks like." A car horn sounded somewhere outside, faint and distant, as if it came from another world. That 1 hour today, it showed me what our life would look like 10 years from now, or 20. It's not that it would be bad. I stopped and searched for the right word. It's just not enough. Willow lowered her head. A tear slipped down and landed on her knee. A small patch of fabric darkened. She thought about the hospital, about the way Makoto's eyes had turned red when he saw her wake up beside his bed. She thought about years ago, when she was hospitalized and he had fallen asleep beside her bedside. She thought about the day they broke up, about slamming the door and walking through the streets while crying for what felt like forever. Then she thought about me, about our first blind date, about how I had been holding documents when she arrived and had scrambled awkwardly to put them away, about the movie, about how she cried uncontrollably while I helplessly handed her tissues, about this morning, about the calm look in my eyes when I said, I don't want to know the answer either. And suddenly she realized something. She had never panicked because of me. Never. She had never received a phone call and dropped everything without thinking just to run to my side. I'm sorry. Her voice trembled. I shook my head. You don't have anything to apologize for. I walked over to the table, picked up the cup of soggy instant noodles, and dumped it into the trash. You should go. It's getting dark. She stood up and looked at me. She had so many things she wanted to say, yet not a single word came out. I walked her to the door. My hand rested on the doorknob. Then I paused. Willow. She looked up. Makoto woke up. If you still want to see him, then go. Don't worry about whether you should. She stared at me. I continued quietly. Some things, once they're missed, they're really gone forever. I opened the door and stepped aside. She walked out and stood in the hallway. Then she turned back to look at me. I remained in the doorway. The light from the apartment behind me stretched my shadow across the floor. George. She called my name. Yeah, you. She seemed unable to find the right words. Take care of yourself. I nodded. She turned around and went downstairs. Her footsteps grew fainter and fainter, until they disappeared completely. I stood in the doorway, looking at the empty hallway, for a long time. Then I closed the door, returned to the apartment, and sat down on the couch. I looked at the water stain on the ceiling, the one that looked like a cat lying on its stomach. In the small apartment where I had lived for years, everything suddenly felt very quiet. My phone lit up. I picked it up. A message from her. Thank you for today. I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed a reply. You're welcome. I'll invite you to my wedding someday. Send. Chapter 13. I set my phone aside and closed my eyes. Outside the window, the streetlights came on. Their warm orange glow filtered into the room, spreading a faint layer of warmth across the floor. I thought about my previous life, about those 10 years, about Emma, about the last meal we ate together, about the night I got drunk, about the moment I opened my eyes and saw that water stain on the ceiling. And then I thought, this is good. Really, this is good. 3 months later, the June sun was blazing. I stood outside my office building and checked the address on my phone one more time. No. 18 Xiangyang Road, Lily Hall. I put away my phone and headed in that direction. Today was Makoto and Willow's wedding. When I received the invitation, I stared at it for several seconds. The invitation was bright red. Printed on it were 2 names, Makoto, Willow. Beneath them was a line of smaller text. You are cordially invited to witness our happiest moment. The sender was Willow. Looking at those words, I remembered that night 3 months ago. The night she stood at my door with tears in her eyes and apologized. The night I replied, I'll invite you to my wedding someday. I hadn't expected those words to become reality so soon. I put the invitation away and went to a department store to buy a red envelope. Inside, I placed 606, a lucky number, a blessing for smooth sailing and good fortune. The wedding was scheduled for 11:18 a.m. at a Chinese restaurant on Xiangyang Road. When I arrived, quite a few guests were already there. Large wedding photos of the bride and groom stood near the entrance. In the pictures, Makoto wore a suit, Willow wore a white wedding gown. The two of them leaned against each other, smiling beautifully. Makoto's smile looked slightly goofy. Willow's carried a hint of shyness. Sunlight bathed them, coating the photographs in a soft golden glow. I stood there and looked at the pictures for a while. Then I walked inside, handing over the red envelope to the attendant collecting gifts. The attendant asked, Are you a friend of the bride or the groom? The bride. The attendant made a note in a ledger and handed me a bag of wedding candies. Please enjoy. Lily Hall is straight ahead. Then turn left. I took the candies and walked inside. Lily Hall contained more than a dozen banquet tables. Many guests were already seated. I picked a seat in a quiet corner and sat down, placing the wedding candies on the table. The ceremony hadn't started yet. The host was testing the sound equipment on stage. Soft music filled the hall. Some guests chatted. Others scrolled through their phones. Children ran up and down the aisles. The tables were neatly arranged with sunflower seeds, peanuts, and sweets. Red tablecloths, golden tableware. Everything looked festive. I unwrapped a piece of candy and put it in my mouth. Milk candy. Soft, sweet, almost too sweet. At exactly 11:18 a.m., the wedding began. The host stepped onto the stage and delivered a brief introduction. Then he invited the groom to come forward. Makoto emerged from a side entrance, dressed in a black suit, a bow tie at his collar, a smile on his face. His injuries had healed completely. No one would have guessed that 3 months earlier he had nearly died. The host asked whether he was nervous. Makoto admitted that he was. Someone in the audience shouted for him to sing a song. He waved his hands quickly. I can't sing. Laughter erupted around the room. Then the music changed. The wedding march began. The doors opened. Willow appeared, dressed in white, her arm linked with her father's. Slowly, she walked into the hall. From my seat in the corner, I watched her move forward step by step. Her gown was strapless. The train flowed behind her across the floor. Her hair was elegantly pinned up. A small crown rested on her head. Her makeup was flawless. A smile curved her lips. She walked steadily. Each step perfectly matched the rhythm of the music, neither too fast, nor too slow. When she reached Makoto, her father placed her hand into his. He said something quietly. Makoto nodded. His eyes were already a little red. Then the two of them stood face to face. The vows began. Mr. Makoto, do you take Miss Willow as your lawfully wedded wife, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health? I do. Miss Willow, do you take Mr. Makoto as your lawfully wedded husband, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health? Willow looked at Makoto. Her eyes sparkled. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. I do. Chapter 14. I sat in the corner, listening to those words. I do. I thought back to 3 months ago, to that morning outside the Civil Affairs Bureau, when I watched Willow get into a taxi and leave. I remembered her sitting in the back seat, clutching that document folder. The panic on her face was something I had never seen before. That was when I knew who I had lost to. Not Makoto. I lost to that phone call. I lost to the person she ran to without thinking. The rings were exchanged. The couple drank from their wedding cups. Both sets of parents came on stage to speak, one step after another. The ceremony followed its course. Finally, the host announced the banquet. Servers carried dishes out one after another. I picked up some food and ate slowly. The guest beside me started a conversation. You're a friend of the bride? Yeah. How long have you known her? 3 months. The man nodded and asked no further questions. Halfway through the meal, the bride and groom began making their rounds to toast the guests. Starting from the main table, they moved from one table to the next. When they reached mine, Willow saw me. She froze. Makoto followed her gaze. He froze too. The three of us stood facing one another. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Makoto extended his hand. George, Willow talks about you a lot. I shook his hand. Congratulations. Thank you. Makoto smiled. I heard about what happened that day. Thank you. I shook my head, saying nothing. Standing beside him, Willow looked at me. She seemed to want to say something, but didn't know how to begin. I looked at her. Happy marriage. Her lips moved slightly. In the end, she only managed to say, thank you. I raised my glass toward them. Makoto and Willow raised theirs as well. The three of us drank together. It was strong liquor, spicy and sharp. The warmth burned down my throat and settled in my stomach. Afterward, they moved on to the next table. I sat back down and continued eating. Outside, the sunlight was perfect. Golden patches stretched across the floor. By the time the wedding ended, it was already past 2 in the afternoon. I followed the crowd toward the exit. Just as I reached the door, someone called my name. George. I turned around. It was Willow. She had changed out of her wedding gown. Now she wore a red cheapao. Her hair had been let down. A faint flush colored her cheeks from all the toasting. She stood near the entrance holding something in her hand. Looking at me, I walked over. This is for you. She held it out. I accepted it. It was a red envelope, but not the one I had given earlier. This one was much thinner. Whatever was inside, it wasn't money. I opened it. Inside was a photograph. A bride and groom stood on a wedding stage. The bride wore white. The groom wore a suit. Both wore serious expressions. One was saying, I do. The other was listening. The picture had been taken from the side, yet it was obvious. The person listening was me. This is. I looked up at her. She lowered her eyes briefly. That day at the Civil Affairs Bureau, I asked the photographer to take it for us. I planned to give it to you after we got our marriage certificate. But then, her voice trailed off. She didn't finish the sentence. I lowered my gaze and stared at the photograph. For a very long time. Keep it. She smiled faintly. Let it be a memory. I slipped the photograph back into the envelope, then put it in my pocket. Okay. We stood there at the entrance. The sunlight poured down around us, stretching our shadows across the ground. I'm leaving. I turned and started walking away. After a few steps, I stopped, then looked back at her. She stood at the doorway, wearing that red cheapao. The wind lifted her hair. A faint smile rested on her face. Willow. I called her name. Yeah. I wish you happiness. She looked at me, then nodded. I turned around once more and continued walking. Out of the restaurant, into the bright June sunlight. The photograph in my pocket rested against my chest, holding a trace of warmth. And this time, I never looked back. Chapter 15. Willow learned that George had gotten married through a post on WeChat Moments. That day, she was cooking at home. Makoto was in the living room playing with their child. Her phone buzzed. She wiped her hands and picked it up. A mutual friend had shared a post. The attached image was a photo of a marriage certificate. The caption read, "Congratulations to George for finally finding his other half." She tapped on the picture and zoomed in. It was a photo of two people. George and a woman she didn't recognize. The woman wasn't exceptionally beautiful, but her smile was warm. Leaning against his shoulder, her eyes curved into crescent moons. George was smiling too. Not the polite smile she was familiar with. Not the smile people wore out of courtesy. This was a genuine smile. Tiny lines appeared at the corners of his eyes. The two of them wore white shirts, holding their marriage certificates. Behind them stood the familiar vow-taking platform inside the Civil Affairs Bureau. Willow stared at the photo for a long time. Makoto walked over carrying their child. "What are you looking at?" She turned off the screen. "Nothing. A friend got married." Makoto leaned over and kissed her. "We got married too." She smiled softly, set the phone down, and continued cooking. That night, lying in bed, she couldn't fall asleep. Makoto slept soundly beside her. His breathing was steady and even. Turning her head, she looked at his face. Moonlight filtered through the gap in the curtains, casting a pale streak of light across his features. She thought about many things. She thought about that morning 3 years ago, standing outside the Civil Affairs Bureau, receiving that phone call. She thought about sitting in the taxi on her way to the hospital. At the time, only one thought existed in her mind. Nothing can happen to him. She thought about the conversation she later had with George, about the words he said. "The person who made you panic wasn't me." She thought about their wedding day, about him standing at the entrance, turning back one last time, and saying, "Be happy." She didn't know what his life was like now. She didn't know who he had married. She didn't know whether they were happy together. But as she looked at the smile on his face in that photograph, something inside her suddenly relaxed. It was a smile she had never seen before. Not the polite smile, not the composed smile, not the familiar smile she remembered. It was a smile that came from his eyes. Perhaps he had finally understood something. Perhaps he had found the person who could make him smile like that. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. Leaves whispered against one another. Willow slowly closed her eyes, and, little by little, drifted off to sleep. Chapter 16. In the 3rd year of my marriage, I had a son. On the day he was born, I paced back and forth outside the delivery room so many times that I lost count. Then a nurse pushed open the door and said, "Mother and baby are both healthy." My legs nearly gave out. I almost collapsed onto the floor. When I finally went inside and saw my wife, her face was pale and her hair was soaked with sweat. Yet she was still smiling at me. "Tired?" I asked. She rolled her eyes. "What do you think? You'd be tired too if you were the one giving birth." I held her hand, and suddenly found myself at a loss for words. We named our son Jack. Simple, easy to write. When he turned 1 month old, we held a banquet. A lot of people came. Friends, colleagues, relatives. More than a dozen tables were filled. I carried Jack in my arms and moved from table to table offering toasts. The little guy slept soundly the entire time, completely unaware of the celebration around him. When I reached one particular table, I saw a familiar figure. Willow. She sat in a corner wearing a light blue dress. Her hair was shorter than before. A faint smile rested on her face. When she saw me approaching, she stood up. "Congratulations," she said. I froze for a moment. "What are you doing here?" "One of Makoto's classmates is your friend," she explained. "He insisted we come." Following her gaze, I looked across the room. Makoto was chatting with someone nearby. He was also holding a child, a little over a year old, perhaps. The toddler was busy tugging at his tie. I asked, "Your second child?" She nodded. "Almost 2 years old." I smiled. "Time really flies." She looked down at the baby in my arms. Tiny, eyes closed, sleeping peacefully. "He looks like you." "Really? Everyone says he looks like his mother." "The eyes look like yours," she said. "They're handsome." I wasn't sure what to say. I looked down at my son, then back at her. "How about you?" I asked. "How's life these days?" "Pretty good." She smiled. "Makoto transferred back to the city. My job is going fine. The kids are healthy. The parents are doing well. Nothing exciting, just ordinary." I nodded. "That's good." A server came by to refill drinks. I raised my glass toward her. She lifted hers and clinked it lightly against mine. It was juice, not alcohol. "I still need to breastfeed later," she explained. Only then did I notice the faint milk stains on the front of her dress. They were subtle, easy to miss. "That's hard work." She shook her head. "That's just motherhood." We stood there chatting for a while, about the baby's 1-month celebration, about parenting, about work, about housing prices, ordinary topics, the kind of conversation 2 old acquaintances might have. Nothing more. Eventually I said, "I should keep going. There are still a lot of people waiting for a toast." "Okay," she smiled. "You should go." I turned around and carried Jack toward the next table. After a few steps, I glanced back. She had already returned to her seat, talking with Makoto. Makoto handed their child to her. She took the little one into her arms and kissed the child's cheek. Then she looked up. Our eyes met. She waved at me. I waved back. Then I turned around and kept walking. By the time the banquet ended, it was already after 3 in the afternoon. I saw off the last group of guests, then stood outside the restaurant entrance. The ground was littered with sunflower seed shells and cigarette butts. I let out a long breath. My wife walked over carrying the baby and leaned against me. Tired? She asked. Not really. She glanced toward the banquet hall. I saw you talking to a woman for quite a while. Who was she? I paused, thought about it, then answered. An old friend. Old? Yeah. I smiled. A very long time ago. My wife didn't ask any further questions. Instead, she shoved Jack into my arms. Hold him. I'm going to the restroom. I took my son and stood at the entrance, watching the traffic move endlessly down the road. Jack shifted in my arms, opened his eyes, looked at me briefly, then closed them again. The sunlight fell over us, warm and gentle. Looking down at his tiny face, I suddenly remembered a figure from many years ago. A beige trench coat, long hair over her shoulders, a document folder in her hand. She waited for more than 10 minutes, then received a phone call, turned around, and got into a taxi. I stood behind a plane tree and watched her disappear into the distance. At the time, I thought that was the end. Only later did I realize it was merely the beginning. Chapter 17. The phone in my pocket vibrated. I took it out and looked at the screen. A text message. An unfamiliar number. No signature. Just a single sentence. Seeing you holding your child today felt wonderful. I'm happy for you. I stared at those words for several seconds. Then I looked up and scanned the area around me. People came and went. Cars passed by. But there was no sign of that familiar figure. I lowered my head. Typed a few words. Deleted them. Typed again. Deleted them once more. In the end, I sent only one word. Thank you. Send. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, held my son in my arms, and walked toward the parking lot. My wife came running out of the restroom and caught up with me. Why didn't you wait for me, so you wouldn't have trouble finding me? TCH. She rolled her eyes, like I'd get lost. I laughed, then handed our son to her. You carry him, I'll drive. The three of us got into the car. The engine started, and we pulled out of the parking lot. As we passed the restaurant, I glanced out the window. Most of the guests had already left. The staff were cleaning up tables and chairs. Sunlight reflected off the red tablecloths, almost blindingly bright. I looked away and focused on the road ahead. What do you want for dinner? Anything. I sighed helplessly. It's always anything. Every time I ask, that's what you say. Hot pot. It's too hot for that. Then what do you want? She thought for a moment. I want crayfish. All right, crayfish it is. Really? Really? My wife smiled. Her eyes curved into crescent moons. I glanced at her smile, then smiled myself. The car merged into traffic and continued forward. Sunlight streamed through the window, casting warm patches of light across my face. I thought, this is nice. Really, this is nice. Chapter 18. Another March 15th. I stood by the window, looking out at the street. 20 years. 20 years had passed since the morning I woke up in that rented apartment. The city outside had changed dramatically. That old building had long since been demolished. A modern residential complex stood in its place. The breakfast stall downstairs was gone. Now there was a convenience store there. I had no idea where the woman who sold pancakes ended up. Sometimes, when I passed a pancake stand elsewhere in the city, I would think of her. 20 years. Long enough for a city to transform. Long enough for me to grow old. I looked down at my hands. Faint age spots had appeared on the backs of them. The joints were larger now. The skin looser. 20 years ago, these hands had been young and strong. They could lift my son with ease. They could survive all-night drafting sessions without complaint. Now they couldn't. Holding my grandson for a while made my arms ache. One sleepless night took 3 days to recover from. Footsteps approached behind me. My wife walked over carrying a cup of tea. Daydreaming again. She handed the cup to me. What are you thinking about? I accepted it and took a sip. Warm. Nothing. I smiled. The weather's nice today. It really is. She stood beside me and looked out the window. Should we take our grandson to the park later? Sure. Together we watched the sunlight outside. Our grandson ran around the living room. Grandpa. Grandpa. I turned around. The little guy was holding a toy airplane above his head, pretending it was taking off. Coming. I laughed and set down my teacup, then walked over. Behind me, my wife watched with a smile on her face. That night, I had a dream. In the dream, I returned to 20 years earlier. I stood outside the Civil Affairs Bureau, watching the figure in the beige trench coat. She stood there looking down at her phone, her brows slightly furrowed, as if waiting for someone. I wanted to walk over, but my legs wouldn't move. I wanted to call her name, but my mouth wouldn't open, so I simply stood there, watching. Then she answered a phone call. Her expression changed. She turned around and ran toward a taxi. The door opened. She got in. The car pulled away. Farther. Farther. until it disappeared at the end of the street. I stood there watching the direction it vanished. The sunlight falling on me was warm. Then someone called my name from behind. I turned around. My wife stood beneath a plane tree. Our 1-month-old son rested in her arms. She smiled at me. "Let's go home." I nodded and walked toward her. After a few steps, I suddenly stopped, then looked back one last time. The end of the street was empty. There was nothing there. I turned around and continued forward. The sunlight stretched our shadows into long shapes across the ground. 3 shadows overlapping together. Impossible to tell where one ended and another began. I reached her side, took our son into my arms, and kissed his little cheek. "Let's go home." Together we turned around and headed toward home. Behind us was that familiar street, crowded with people, busy with traffic. Ahead stood the old apartment building where we had lived for so many years. Several pots of pothose plants sat on the windowsill. Their leaves shone bright green in the sunlight. Holding my son, I walked forward one step at a time, and this time, I never looked back.